Twice in this one day have you opposed my orders, my entreaties. Nevertheless, I shall discover the mystery which you refuse to unveil.
Monsieur, you shall read no further.
Who will hinder me?
Count, I will.
You! Rash fool!
So there you go. You are reading the lines that Frank read here in Bolton.
Oh, stop it.
Over 140 years ago.
Wow.
One of the things I wanted to show you was an advert, again from the era, from 1875.
The Two Orphans. Mr. J. Pitney Weston, in big letters, has selected the following artists.
So we've got Frank Lowe.
Now, wait a minute. Mrs. Frank Lowe. That must be Frank Lowe's wife.
That's right. But it is the Two Orphans, which is the big break.
I see.
Mr. Pitney Weston bought the rights to the Two Orphans, a successful London production,
Yeah.
and was going to produce it across the north. And, of course, we know where Mr. Weston is based.
Bolton? He's based in Bolton, where I used to live when I was a teenager. Theatre and Opera House, oh, the Two Orphans. And Mr. Frank Lowe gave an excellent impersonation of the Minister of Police. So Frank lived in Bolton for a time, or stayed in Bolton, in digs, I suppose. Well, 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 well.
To find out more about Frank's time here, he's come to meet theatrical historian Professor James Moran.
Ian, great to see you.
Very nice to see you.
Welcome back to your old stomping ground.
Thank you very much.
In the 1870s, there were 3 large theatres in Bolton, run by the impresario James Pitney Weston. Today, the Octagon is the town's only professional theatre.
Frank's in this play, which you know about.
Two Orphans, yeah.
And James Pitney Weston, this big character in Bolton's entertainment industry, acquires the rights to tour it outside London and recruits Frank to be in that production.
This says Mr. Frank Lowe. I love it when they call actors Mr., don't you? Mr. Frank Lowe as Count de Lumière in Two Orphans for the 150th time. So is this a little ad he's put in the paper?
This is an advert that Frank himself has put into a theatrical newspaper. Most of the actors at this time are touting for business. This may have been a very canny way of him telling theatre managers that he's had this lovely run of 150 performances.
I see. I see.
The play itself, The Two Orphans, is a melodrama, so it's a drama of heightened emotion.
Yeah. Has anyone ever read it? Does it exist?
I have a copy here. Would you like to
James,
have
of course
a
I
look
would.
at it?
Of course I would.
In fact, would you like to try it on the stage?
All right, first read through. Okay, sure. So what is Frank's part?
Frank's playing a French nobleman, and the Count suspects that his wife has this terrible secret. And I will read in the part of your nephew, who is a noble young man who wants to prevent you from ruining yourself and your family. Okay.
Now, Chevalier, speak out. What did the Countess say? I desire to know all.
Monsieur.
I beg of you. I command.
I have really nothing to say, monsieur.
Very well, monsieur. Twice in this one day have you opposed my orders, my entreaties. Nevertheless, I shall discover the mystery which you refuse to unveil.
Monsieur, you shall read no further.
Who will hinder me?
Count, I will.
You! Rash fool!
So there you go. You are reading the lines that Frank read here in Bolton.
Oh, stop it.
Over 140 years ago.
Wow. Why did nobody in my family ever tell me that we had an actor in the family? Because either they didn't know or they weren't very pleased about it.
So I think The Two Orphans is probably a great gig for Frank to get, because it's a steady income and he's being engaged by James Pitney Weston. The problem is Weston is very, very ambitious and emigrates to the USA. So that's potentially a real blow for Frank, who has lost someone who's been supporting his career.
Yeah. Theatre Royal, somewhat meagre attendances this week, but notwithstanding the depressing effect of small audiences, the artists play with considerable spirit. Mr. Frank Lowe plays Bob Garfield, the village blacksmith, very artistically.
So I think he's struggling with a pretty terrible part in a fairly fourth-rate play.
I'm afraid that is probably the case.
By now he's late 30s, so he's been in the business for quite a while. And the records that we do have from the 1880s show him in productions of what we might say was really very variable quality.
This is from Wavertree. That's Liverpool, isn't it?
That's right.
Frank Lowe, head of the household by this time, 43, actor, Ellen Lowe, wife, so his wife's called Ellen, doesn't give her an occupation.
So it looks as though Frank and Ellen don't have children.
No, and they're living in Liverpool.
This is Ellen's hometown, and I think she's probably living with Frank and her extended family.
I see.
Ian has travelled to Liverpool, where his great-great-uncle, Frank Lowes, lived with his wife, Ellen, in the 1890s.
In the census of 1891, Frank Lowe is down as living here in Liverpool. Anything you know about
Well, I've got this document. It's very small, so...
the amusements in Liverpool?
Yeah, we're looking at 1892.
Another Paddington Palace of Varieties. The Palace of Varieties.
Variety was just a posh name for music hall, and it was trying to compete with the legitimate theatre.
I see.
But for a professional actor like Frank Lowe, it was a real drop down. To be in a music hall was something which he probably wouldn't have chosen. He's at the bottom of the bill now, in a music hall in a rather rough area of Liverpool.
Palace of Varieties, where he was performing. Would this be a season?
No, a music hall, it ran a week of entertainment.
And then the company would...
They'd move off and they'd have to find another engagement. It was extremely unreliable and precarious. This is the admissions book to the Liverpool Workhouse.
No, dear, oh dear.
And this is in 1893, which is the year just after the Paddington Palace of Varieties.
Yeah. No, Frank, he is down as an actor, not as a performer or a comic or anything. Married, and he was admitted by his wife, Ellen.
Well, what we see is that Ellen at this time was living at a different address.
Oh.
And he had spent the night, obviously, somewhere else. We don't know how long they'd been separated for. All we know is that they were separated. Well, at that time, there was no hospitals, no insurance. So if you were an actor on very little money, the workhouse was a last resort to get help.
And do we know how long he stayed?
We do. This is the death certificate.
Of who?
For Frank.
Frank Lowe, 47 years, actor. And he died on the 2nd of January, 1894, at the Liverpool Workhouse. The cause of death, phthisis?
There's another word for TB, or tuberculosis.
Oh. And exhaustion. But he would have been pleased, I suppose, that he was defined by that occupation, actor.